YouTube. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how to properly use the gym to increase your speed, and making sure you use the gym correctly is extremely important, because a lot of people, they tend to use the gym as athletes in an incorrect manner, and this is usually what hinders their speed, because a lot of people have a lot of power in the gym but they don't have as much speed on the track and they're confused. And one of the easiest way to understand why this is because just look at some of the strongest athletes of our time. For example, let's use Eddie Hall for an example. He's deadlifted 500 kg. Someone who could deadlift 500 kg probably can't even break 12 seconds for the 100 meters. And the reason why that is because you need the right balance of a bunch of different metrics. Too much strength will result in too little mobility. And if you start to get more mobility, you start to lose your strength. So we need to find a correct area, because the gym is just one specific point in our training, because we need to work on mobility, we need to work on muscle strength, we also need to work on bone density and tendon springiness and density as well, I guess. But we also need to work on our form. And if we focus too much on one thing, we're going to end up neglecting the other stuff. And the only thing I could say you'd be allowed to kind of get away with working on and neglecting the rest of would be form, purely because in form training, once you've got the form down, it's really hard to lose it. So you can now focus more on the other stuff. But if you're focusing on gym, you need to understand that the reason why we have the gym isn't so we become big mass monsters like Eddie Hall, for example, but it's so that we can get faster, which means where we train has to be with high velocities, not always heavy weights, but high velocities. Sometimes there will be a need for extremely heavy weights or moderately heavy weights, but a lot of the time we want to be working with lower weighted workouts, purely because everything we do in the gym taxes our central nervous system, just like sprinting. No, not just like how sprinting does, but just like the rest of our trainings do, because sprinting, plyometrics, they all tax our central nervous system the same way the gym does. And we want to make sure that what our central nervous system does, puts the majority of its effort, the quality it has into, is improving our sprint speed, which means we want to get the most out of our CNS when we're sprinting, not when we're doing plyometrics or when we're in the gym. It would be good if we could, but that's secondary. Our sprinting work is the main variable here. Hence, you want to make sure that when we're in the gym, we're not always lifting heavy. We want to make sure we're lifting light weights fast, especially when we're coming up into the season and we have more races. For example, the way you're training when you don't have a race within the next, about let's say a month, would be very different to how you'd be training if you have a race 2 weeks away, because you want to make sure that your body isn't fatigued, because the central nervous system won't recover in 24 hours. It might not even recover in 48 hours. It could take anywhere between 48 to 72 hours before it's back to its peak state, which means if you're doing, like, for example, say you have a race on Saturday and you're doing max squats, like you're trying to PB in a squat, and this is a Thursday, your body might not recover for that race on Saturday, and you might wonder why you've suddenly gotten slower or why you haven't improved. And it's because it could potentially be because of the work you did on Thursday. But if you're working that hard, generally there's a good chance that you're ruining your body, because if you put too much work into the gym, it can ruin your peak. So you get a suboptimal peak when you actually go to your races, especially near the end of the season where you really want to be peaking perfectly. It could be a factor that ruins your competitions. But even more importantly, we need to realize that the gym isn't so much to build muscular strength, but it's to fix problems. Because as sprinters, we're technically chasing the peak of human possibilities in a forward horizontal motion. And to chase perfection, you need to be perfect or as close to it as possible, which means you need to get rid of a lot of problems, which the gym, if you use it correctly, can help you get rid of. Which is why there's a lot of people who are fast sprinters who maybe have never gone in the gym, or if you put them into the gym, they can't lift heavy, but they can run faster than you. And the reason being is they don't really have as many problems as we do, because they've actually focused on these problems. And what's really good is, for a lot of the problems, you don't even need to be in a gym to fix them. You just need to make sure you do the right body weight movements, which is why they might not be able to bench 100 kg or squat 150 kg, for example. But if you put them in a race, they might be able to run 10 seconds. Not flat, but 10 seconds. You get the point. Because when you're in a gym, you want to focus on fixing imbalances, preventing injuries, and improving coordination. Imbalances, injury prevention and coordination, all things you can fix outside of the gym. The gym does do other things such as improve muscular strength, which you do need. I'm not saying you don't need it, but you still do need it. But the main focus in the gym is to fix these other problems. Because when you have imbalances, you have a high risk of injury and you have poor coordination. This is like a hell recipe, that the highest level hell recipe for an athlete, because this could result in the most hideous injuries, the longest time to recover, and the most iffy form. Because if you have like crazy imbalances, what generally ends up happening is you can't really control your body as much, and you're used to compensating. It's like switching from being a quad dominant sprinter to a hip dominant sprinter, or trying to be a hip dominant sprinter. It feels weird. You feel constricted, but once you get used to it, it's fine. The reason being is you're so strong in your quads that every other muscle you have that you're supposed to be sprinting with in a specific order is just so weak to the point where it feels off, or you just never turn on the muscle. For example, if you never felt your hips before and you've only sprinted with your quads again, then when you start sprinting with your hips, it's gonna feel weird. But making sure we fix these problems and we reduce our chances of injury and we improve our coordination is extremely important, because you're only as fast as your weakest link and you're only as strong as your weakest link. That's the actual quote. And if your weakest link is supposed to be one of the main movers in the movement, so let's stick with the hip flexors. So if your hip flexors are extremely weak, then you can already expect you're not going to be going very fast, because they don't care how strong your glutes are, how strong your quads are, how strong your calves are, whether this is your gastroc or your soleus, or how strong your core is. If your hip flex is weak, you're only going to be able to move as fast as your hip flexor will allow you to. It's the same thing if any of these other muscles are weak as well. Though certain ones have a bigger playing factor than other ones. For example, your hips, your core, your calves, your gastroc, and your soleus have a much bigger playing factor when it comes to your speed than your quads would, and your glutes as well, your glutes too. But making sure that these main muscles are strong and the chances of them being injured is low is extremely important, which is why that's the real reason why we go to the gym, because our bodies are able to produce a crazy amount of force, a lot more than you're already producing, believe it or not. This is probably even true for Usain Bolt. He could probably produce a lot more force, because I'm pretty sure the maximum amount of force human beings potential to sprint with is about, I think it's 6 times body weight, or if it's not 6 times, it might even be 8. And when you consider the fact that people like Usain Bolt are putting in 5 times their body weight, you can see that you can produce a lot more force. You just need to actually be able to get to that if it's possible. Because this is why you see people that, like, for example, let's say you have a mother and a child and they're in a dangerous situation where their child's underneath a car and it's burning, it might explode. The mother is able to save their child, but like maybe within a week, they're dead. Reason being is their body has overridden the safety system that they put in place in the body to make sure that your safety was paramount. She overrided that so she could save her child. But in exchange for overriding that, she finished her lifespan. So what we want to do when we're in the gym is make it so that we don't need to override this. We just push this barrier higher and higher and higher, so that we don't need to essentially think we need to kill ourselves to try and achieve faster speeds, which is the main thing we try to do in the gym. Which is why you're able to, the more time you spend in the gym training properly, the faster you get as the seasons progress. As long as plyometrics, because these are all, and sprinting as well, because these are all forms of strengthening your muscles. Your muscles, your tendons, and your bones. As long as you do this barrier that limits the amount of force you're able to produce, it just gets raised higher and higher and higher, and with the goal eventually being to remove it. But no one's ever done that before. But if you were able to get as high as possible to like 5 times your body weight without having to worry about ruining your lifespan, you'd obviously be world class, even if your form was garbage. As long as you could somewhat get your force production in the correct or direct direction, you'd be somewhat world class. So when we're in the gym, you want to make sure that we focus on improving our imbalances, reducing chances of injury, and improving coordination, as long as doing the other things that we already do in the gym, because you want to essentially push up this barrier so we can get faster. Because if you don't push up this barrier and you just instead focus on strengthening what you already have, this barrier is going to stay the same, and essentially what's going to end up happening is your body is just going to be able to control what you have less and less and less. And when you go onto the track to sprint, you're going to realize you're either going to feel slower or you're going to get a slower time. And it's purely because you haven't been focusing on the right things, or the things you have been focusing on, you've been focusing on them in the wrong direction. So making sure we improve this is essential if you want to get faster speeds. If you like my video, like the video, let me know in the comments section below. Check the description, because anything I forget to say in the video, I always put in the description. And if you like my content, subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. I post every 2 days at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If you don't know when that is, just hit the bell and then you'll be notified instantly.